In the winter of 2014, the parking lot behind a shuttered grocery store in Phoenix, Arizona, became Daniel Carter's home. Every single night, as the city lights softened and the hum of traffic faded into a whisper, Daniel would pull his old, silver Toyota Camry into the darkest corner he could find. He'd carefully cover the windows with black trash bags, not just for privacy, but to block out the world that had seemingly cast him aside. He would turn off the engine to save every last drop of precious gasoline, and then he'd lie down across the back seat, pulling a thin blanket he bought from a dollar store over himself. At 34 years old, Daniel Carter was homeless. But this wasn't the story you might imagine. It wasn't because of drugs, it wasn't because of crime, and it certainly wasn't because he was lazy or didn't want to work. It was because his life, once so stable and predictable, had completely and utterly collapsed all at once. You see, Daniel once lived what many people would call a normal life. He had a modest apartment, a steady job in retail management, and big dreams of one day opening his own logistics company. He was the kind of guy who worked long hours, saved his money carefully, and truly believed that if you just played by the rules and worked hard, life would eventually reward you for your effort. He was on a path, he was doing everything right. And then, in a blink, everything changed. It started with his mother. She got sick. The diagnosis was cancer. Daniel didn't think twice. He took unpaid leave from his job to become her full-time caregiver. As he watched over his mom, the medical bills began to pile up, a relentless tide of expenses that quickly washed away his life savings. After she passed, he returned to work, grieving but ready to rebuild, only to be told his position had been restructured. That was just the cold, corporate way of saying it was gone. He was laid off. Unemployment benefits helped for a little while, but they were just a temporary patch on a gaping wound. Rent doesn't wait for you to get back on your feet. First came the late notices, then the eviction papers. In just 8 short months, Daniel went from a respected manager to jobless. From a renter to homeless, with his entire life packed into the trunk of his car. The most crushing part, he didn't tell anyone, not his friends. Not his former coworkers, not even distant family members. Shame is a heavy burden, and Daniel carried it in silence. His daily routine became a masterclass in invisibility. Every morning, long before the sun rose and the city began to stir, he'd drive his Camry to a 24-hour gym where he kept a cheap membership. He'd shower, shave, and put on clean clothes that he'd meticulously wash at a laundromat the day before. To anyone who saw him, he just looked like another guy starting his day. Then he would spend the entire day applying for jobs. He walked into retail stores, warehouses, delivery companies, and offices, handing out his resume with a hopeful smile. But the response was always the same, a chorus of polite rejection. "We'll keep your resume on file. You're a bit overqualified for this role. We decided to go with another candidate." Day after day, the doors closed. At night, he returned to the quiet darkness of the parking lot, eat a cold meal of canned food, and by the dim light of his phone screen, he'd fill a small notebook with business ideas and logistics plans. He wasn't lazy, he wasn't hopeless, he was simply surviving, completely invisible to the world around him. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. Daniel walked into a small, unassuming shipping warehouse on the industrial edge of town. A worn-out sign hanging crookedly on the front door read, "Hiring drivers, immediate start." Inside, a man in his late 50s sat behind a desk buried under stacks of paper. His name was Mr. Alvarez. He glanced at Daniel's resume, but he didn't ask about his past job titles. He didn't seem to care about the gap in his employment history. Instead, he looked Daniel straight in the eye and asked one simple, direct question: "How bad do you want to work?" Daniel paused. In that moment, for the first time in months, he decided to drop the act. He let the walls of shame come down and he told the truth. He spoke about his mother, about losing his job, his savings, his apartment. He admitted he was sleeping in his car. He made it clear he wasn't looking for pity, he was looking for a chance. Just one chance to prove himself. Mr. Alvarez listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When Daniel finished, the older man just nodded slowly. Then he said, "Can you start tomorrow morning?" The job was minimum wage. There were no benefits, no guarantees. But for Daniel, it was a lifeline. He accepted without a second of hesitation. That job became his entire world. Daniel worked harder than anyone in that warehouse. He was the first to arrive every morning and the last to leave at night. He learned every delivery route, memorized every shortcut, and started fixing problems before anyone even asked him to. He poured all of his pain, his frustration, and his hope into that work. At night, he still returned to his Camry in the parking lot. But now, something was different. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had direction, he had a purpose. After just 6 months of this relentless effort, he was promoted to shift supervisor. A year after that, he finally saved enough to rent a small room to have a roof over his head that wasn't the ceiling of his car. 2 years later, he moved into his own modest apartment. He was back, but he never, ever forgot what it felt like to be invisible. He never forgot the sting of being judged by people who knew nothing about his story. He never forgot the feeling of being completely and utterly ignored. At 39 years old, 5 years after he first parked his Camry in that dark lot, Daniel did something everyone around him called crazy. He quit his stable job. He took every single dollar he had saved, bought one used delivery van, and with just one client, he started his own logistics company. The very one he had dreamed of in his notebook. Some of his old coworkers laughed. They told him, "You're risking everything all over again. Are you insane?" And in a way, they were right. He was. That first year was absolutely brutal. He lost contracts. He worked through countless sleepless nights, drowning in paperwork and stress. The fear of failure was a constant companion, but Daniel ran his business differently. He remembered the feeling of being on the outside, and he made a point to hire the people that other companies ignored. He hired single parents who needed flexible hours. He hired people who, like him, had been homeless and were fighting for a second chance. He hired people with gaps in their resumes that made other employers nervous. He didn't ask them where they had failed. He asked them where they wanted to go. Today, Daniel Carter is the CEO of a thriving regional logistics company that operates across 3 states. He employs over 120 people. His company is known not just for its efficiency, but for its culture of compassion and second chances. One day, while visiting a new warehouse, Daniel noticed a familiar face among a group of new hires. It was a man he recognized from years ago, a former retail manager who had once looked at his resume, smiled politely, and told him they'd gone with someone else. The man didn't recognize Daniel, now the well-dressed CEO of the company, but Daniel recognized him. And instead of feeling any bitterness or resentment, Daniel just felt a wave of gratitude for his own journey. He walked over, shook the man's hand, and welcomed him to the team. Later, after the man found out who Daniel was, he approached him, looking completely stunned. He asked, Why would you hire me after I turned you away all those years ago?" Daniel just smiled and said something that has become the core philosophy of his entire life and business, because everyone deserves a second chance. Sometimes people aren't failing, they're just surviving. Daniel's story is a powerful reminder. Failure is not the end of the story. Being ignored doesn't mean you're unworthy. Being broke doesn't mean you're broken. And being homeless certainly doesn't mean you're hopeless. Sometimes the darkest parking lot is only a chapter, not the conclusion. And sometimes the very people who are sleeping in their cars today are busy building the companies of tomorrow. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content that we hope will inspire you. We'll see you in the next one.